Welcome to Interplay Conversations in Music. This is your host, Michael Shapiro. Today with conductor, cellist, musician extraordinary, man of the world, Eric Jacobsen. Hi, Eric. How are you?
That's a very hard introduction to
Why?
follow.
But that's you.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for putting this together. It's great to have a conversation.
Well, it's great to have a conversation in music always. And today with Eric Jacobsen, who I consider one of the most organic, if I may, musicians I've ever heard, seen, thought about. What do I mean by organic? What I mean is whatever you approach as a conductor or as a cellist, as a musician, as a leader, it feels very fresh. So if you're conducting Brahms, for example, when I heard you live before this all hit, the Brahms sounded like a new piece.
Oh,
And for this composer, that's important because I think it's also your journey as a musician. Because didn't you start out basically as a chamber musician? Isn't that accurate?
absolutely. I think, well, first of all, thank you. All the things you said are too sweet. But yes, I remember very clearly when I got the bug to play music, which was somewhere 12, 13, 14, like, this is really the thing I need to do. It was chamber music that drove me there. It was being in a small group and, feeling connected, being able to talk to people on a different level, flirting, figuring out how to do that thing. And when I was in college, there's no question that I thought if I could be a chamber musician, if I could make a living, if I could exist as someone who could communicate on that level, that's it. Because, and to this day, right, to this day, we all recognize that the intimacy of the string quartet, the euphemism for egalitarian conversation and thought and being able to be together, that's so incredibly special. And so as now that I'm a conductor and spend most of my time doing that, I think of the quartet as really the metaphor for what you want an orchestra to feel like. You want it to feel like the person playing second bassoon and the person mid section and the first violins are connected on the deepest level. So to this day, it's still the search for chamber music with a larger palette.
It used to be that conductors got their training in the opera house because it was thought to be that, and it's true, that was my background, that the working with the singer and the breath is very important. And also to use the name of this broadcast, the interplay between stage and pit. But chamber music's no different, especially, with your brother, Colin, the great violinist, and the creation of the Brooklyn Riders, your string quartet, where you professionally were listening to each other all the time. And then you work with Silk Road and so forth, with Yo-Yo. All of this stuff has gotten you ready, don't you think, for dealing with the ins and outs of a Brahms symphony and phrasing and
Absolutely.
timing.
Yeah.
But also there's a period thing. You've played as a performing musician in chamber music, probably most of the Beethoven, if not all of the Beethoven string quartets, Mozart quartets, many Haydn quartets, to Shostakovich and who knows what else quartets. So when you approach, a Shostakovich symphony, let's say, having performed the Shostakovich string quartets, you're one of the few people in the world, other than maybe David Oistrakh, who can claim that. Don't you think?
That is absolutely one of, I feel like my lucks in life is that I was a string player versus being a pianist, which some of the time I mean, if you could give me the ability tomorrow to play piano well, you could choose any toe of mine you want. It's yours. But
Be
as a
safe, be safe, be safe.
but of course, growing up as a cellist and being able to have that connection, I'm about to say the connection to breath, because you're right. The
Yeah,
string quartet is about the breath.
that's right.
And of course, you can't expect to communicate with an orchestra, especially when half of it are people that, literally use their breath to make the sound on their instrument, without that feeling. I still think about the time, obviously when you're young and you're playing in a quartet for one of the first times, like you actually do that thing where you're like, where you give an upbeat and it's exactly in time, and you're in that tempo. And then you get to a place with a quartet that you play with more and more, and your breath stops being about pulse, like instead of thinking this is your breath, it starts to actually reflect exactly what the concept of the music is. And that's a really kind of interesting thing. So, the calm pulse of when you play something that has like a romantic or cantabile, beautiful sung moment, it has a different energy and maybe a slightly different pulse than if you're playing something quick and it's like bright and energetic. And I think that's a very important thing. I still think that when there are moments, a couple times in life, only a couple, where I'm on stage and I'm playing, but I'm not playing. Somehow my brother is like with his brain reaching out and pulling my bow across the string. And the earth moves. There are only a few times that happens, and when I've experienced that, it's such a beautiful moment of giving yourself to something. It's not taking, and it's not no one's leading, but everyone's leading. It's not a dictation, it's not a reception. It's just all this thing together, and that's, I think when you say that, which is so beautiful that you feel like going to see a Brahms concert, the organic feeling of what that is.
You've been there.
I hope that the reason for that is the idea that this push-pull of who's leading, who's following is constantly changing.
I love that about his tapestry. There's no question, in him especially.
Exactly. So, when a horn player has this long solo and you're thinking about where it's going, but you're really so tapped in with the breath of that human.
Brahms 3, the romantic movement, when that horn comes in. If you didn't have the experience of playing the Brahms piano quintet, I don't know you could do that movement as well. But you have.
I don't disagree.
I want to talk to you about the interaction, the interface. I'm not going to use interplay again, between your stick and the players. This is an interesting fact, which I've encountered over my life. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The times it works, you feel as if you're Harry Potter fighting Voldemort and the wand is going back at you. Do you know that feeling? I had it recently, before the pandemic, when I recorded Archangel Piano Concerto of mine with your Steve Beck. I say your Steve Beck because that's how we met. Your Steve Beck. I love him. Greatest pianist that I've ever encountered. He can read anything. In any event, we're recording with the BBC National Orchestra of Wales about a year ago, the piano concerto. And I'm feeling a tension in that baton that was just magnificent. Why? Because there was this communication going on between me and those players, and the breath, and dealing with Steve Beck's amazing virtuosity and phrase making. I saw it in your conducting, that you let them come to you and you go back at them. It's a very interesting phenomenon. There are some conductors that you don't see that. When you watch Toscanini's recordings, another cellist, by the way, you see this kind of like magnetism. I've shown it to like second graders watching him conduct Wagner, and they're all looking like this. They can't believe what's going on because it looks like a wizard. But don't you think there is a connection between your cello learning of breath and your brother moving your arm and what you're doing with the stick? I saw a string player conducting who had this interface going on. Talk about that phenomenon and why does it happen for you?
Absolutely. Well, I think there's no question that the bow transitioned into the baton, right? So at some point before there was a conductor, there was the first violin, or there was the harpsichord player, the organist, or keyboard instrument player, and they would maybe show like, here we go, bum, and there, as the orchestra grew, as um, industrialization grew, and the world grew as
And
wanting more.
and conductors got gangrene like Lully when he went boom and hit his foot.
Exactly.
God Almighty,
Exactly.
that's not a good story. But now talk
No.
about it too. I mean, this kind of this mysterious quality where literally it comes up through your legs, into your arm, into them, and then it comes back. That's the Harry Potter phenomenon.
Well, I will say, confession, that my wife said she wouldn't marry me if I hadn't read the Harry Potter books.
She's right.
And years later, we're married, but I never read the Harry Potter books.
But
But, and she's doing better than me because she had not seen the Godfather movies.
all right, well, we'll talk about both.
She watched those. I haven't started to read. Okay. I What you're talking about is something real, and though it's not tangible,
No, it's not.
a feeling that, first of all, the bow in itself, um, the connection to the string, I think that rub, the tension, and the um, uh, connection, they're very similar. Every instrument has this. So the flute player has it where the wind is going, you feel kind of a pushback in some
Right.
ways. And clearly on a brass instrument, you have that buzz, but really, coming from what part of your body? Is it your head? Is it your breath? Everyone has that point of intersection. And actually, getting to play with musicians from outside of the classical world, I feel, I remember Bela Fleck saying the brotherhood of the pick. When you're picking an instrument like a banjo or a mandolin, it's so immediate. It just, the second you do it, and we all know this as orchestral musicians, a pizzicato, even when you pluck the string with the flesh of your hand, that speaks sooner than the bow on the string. So in some ways, the pizz has to be a little later, so it's all matched together. And I feel like every instrument has that moment of connection with their sound. And for me, now that you're there and you're not actually making sound, you're actually just trying to gather people and bring people on the same wavelength and goal and trajectory. Like, hey, we're going here with the music. How are we going to get there? Let's all go. I feel blessed that having had the time with that, the cello with the bow on the string, that that is a moment that one can feel, and all musicians know what that is, whether it's a pianist, a percussionist, a string player, a wind player, Brett, and you know where that thing is. So I hope I bring that to any orchestra that I'm with.
Well, it was clear. It was very clear watching you and also listening to the recordings and seeing now the video. Now, there are 3 organizations that you are active with, and you will be again soon. And they are, of course, the Brooklyn Knights, which is a phenomenal group. I often think it's almost like a gorilla using the GUE, not the GO. But what you do is you put together different ensembles for different occasions, pretty much. There's a season, but there's also, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and we're going to be outside, or we're going to be in a bar, or we're going to be, out in Central Park. It doesn't, you don't care where it is. The communication's what's important. That, what I call about the cross-fertilization. But then there's Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra, which in Central Florida, and the Greater Bridgeport Symphony. These 3 organizations, very different communities, very different needs. One's Brooklyn and the New York metropolitan area, and also going to Europe and all kinds of places that you've gone to. And then you've got these local institutions. So I'm just curious, when you're building a season, because you have to think about nothing happens, immediate. We have to plan way in advance typically to get soloists and blah blah blah, do the right repertoire. What's the difference for you? Or is there one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, every community needs a different something at a different time with regard to specific music programmed, specific soloists. How do you gather people? What does a community need and want? And what do they not know that they need and want that you could
Ah,
bring to them? Because obviously, the duty of an orchestra, there are duties that are like a museum. We are the civic orchestra that brings the great historic works
mhm.
to the stage.
Right.
And so that's one aspect of being a civic orchestra. Maybe that aspect was something that was more uh, say that maybe that used to be 95% of what civic orchestras did,
Ah,
20 years ago. And I feel like now the transition for orchestras is really about the words that are said and maybe cliche are like relevance and sustainability and connecting. And
good.
of course, all those things are true. And we need to figure out a way that an orchestra in a city can be connected with not just the immediate patron base of ticket buyers, subscribers, things like that, because we need to be everywhere, right? Everyone needs to be everywhere right now, for better or for worse.
And
And
Eric,
of
there's not just one audience. That's what orchestras need to learn. And many of them have. You know, because you are an entrepreneur with your brother, with, of course, the Brooklyn Knights, and you've seen it. Remember, there's no Brooklyn Philharmonic anymore. There
right,
are the Brooklyn Knights. And why? Because you answered a need. It's really true.
yeah, yeah. The Knights is really about figuring out where is where is the place that we can most fit. We have to carve out our niche because, of course, New York is so plentiful with so many incredible
I
artists,
know.
great groups. So you have to
Yeah.
find your way to create. And it's funny, we have sort of different, we plug into different needs in different places. In Europe, actually, when we tour generally, a symphonic orchestra that's like a Beethoven symphony or a
Right.
Schubert symphony.
Hmm.
Now we pair that and we frame that with the most beautiful, colorful frames. Sometimes it's gold and you're putting Couperin or something, and sometimes it's kind of a rustic new thing like Thomas Adès over here, or sometimes it's just a canvas that has no frame around it, like Rameau or something, and then making arrangements and Barrio, all different programs that come together for various reasons. And I feel like for me, programming, especially with the Knights, when we're touring, say, a standard piece of music, and I say standard meaning of the classical canon, it's really about what do you put around it to make those things unique. And for civic orchestras, like programming music in
Right.
Orlando, not only do we have to play, a Schumann symphony that I was just thinking about recently that we're doing in about a month and a half, but also need to bring composers with that thing so they could actually have a new way of thinking about Schumann. So this concert that's coming up with Schumann's Second Symphony, we're doing like a Lembit Beecher world premiere with a cellist who's been here before, Karen Azunian, absolutely incredible. And I think we're starting that concert with an Arvo Pärt piece. And it's kind of a beautiful, it's an outdoor concert. So there's something very special about all those elements, which are very nature oriented in
Good.
general.
Good.
And being, I think, really being able to represent, all different styles of music. Now that's only 3 composers on a season, but clearly it's about trying to reach a new understanding of different music.
And that's wonderful. And now in Bridgeport, you also go into the schools. I know that you've been doing that.
Yes, on every program that we're together, we're in at least one school. Sometimes, and it works in different ways. What we've really been trying to do is bring the entire orchestra to schools. It's kind of a daunting task for all the reasons. Not only are schools hard to,
I know.
like, hey, are we available right now? But also the just getting, 60 people through a door of the school is very
But it
hard.
makes such a difference. I've spoken to old timers years ago who spoke about the first time they heard classical music was when the Philadelphia Orchestra and Leopold Stokowski came to their school. Can you
Oh,
imagine?
so beautiful.
And he did
Yeah.
it all the time. Stokey did it all the time.
Yeah.
And he invited people in to see rehearsals. Kusevitsky did it too.
Yeah.
It's smart because you become part of that whole community.
Yeah. So
You
we've
know,
been
yeah,
both
go
in
on.
Bridgeport and Orlando. We have these rehearsals that take place. So you have like 4 or 5 rehearsals, and then you have concerts. And we've been trying to do our rehearsals, at least some of them, in school auditoriums
Smart.
and make it available. So, and it becomes kind of, there are various ways. You could just rehearse and let people watch. You could make it an open rehearsal and engage briefly. But we always try to put it so that students show up at a certain time, and during that time we perform for them, meaning we interact with them and ask them questions and try to have that thing. I think it does go a very long way to building relationships that might pay dividends in 30 years because you're in the school and then you go to college and you have a family and, oh, do you remember
That Eric Jacobsen, he introduced me to the Beethoven Eroica when I was 7 years old. What an introduction. Boy, was he good. This is the stuff that we have to build on.
That's good.
I have a question that I've asked other conductors and musicians, which I find interesting as a 70-year-old composer. Why does some music last and some does not? When Beethoven wrote his 9 symphonies, there were 300 symphonies being written by other people. Maybe we remember a little bit of Cherubini and sometimes Hummel, but otherwise, no. What makes something stick in your mind?
Well, I guess it's 2 or 3 things. It's one that greatness does rise to some degree. Sometimes things that are great get lost, but I think it's that, and it's fashion, right? Things are not in fashion right now that are still truly great, and will hopefully circle back.
What kind of things are not in fashion now?
Oh, I remember my teacher, Harvey Shapiro, talking about how Boelman, a composer who wrote various pieces, and maybe most famous was the Symphonic Variations for Cello and Orchestra, a 20-minute piece, which is probably just as valid as a piece of music as Saint-Saëns Concerto or something, it's kind of late romantic, beautiful, and it fell out of fashion because it was maybe the composer's name didn't become such a thing, and there wasn't enough behind it. It wasn't part of like this French movement, and we end up saying, oh, that's not really the thing now. And there obviously are loved composers of a time period. Like clearly John Adams is the most recognized American symphonic composer. I mean, Philip Glass, but John, in terms of that's what he does. He does a little bit of film score, but really it's that thing. And he will clearly, as he continues to compose, be commissioned, and more pieces are going to be written. And as far as I'm concerned, his name and his music will live on forever. And like Beethoven was recognized in his time. He wasn't an undiscovered composer for being great and being amazing, and people loved him. And they judged him as, maybe these days, because the word genius gets thrown around, maybe some people who have greatness and have been recognized as great, maybe they get a pass. And it's, oh yeah, it was still great because he's or she's so genius and brilliant that they, of course it's so good.
But you mentioned Beethoven. It's interesting. In the 1820s, he was eclipsed by Rossini.
Well, the opera, the stage continues to be the thing where, oh, well, maybe that's more of the perfect art, right?
And he was rather annoyed about that. It turns out
as being the most famous, you mean?
popular, getting performed, being the hot ticket.
Yeah.
Right? It's very interesting the way these things work. And then you look at somebody like Maya Bear, who was, just a massively huge composer making all kinds of money. And nobody's doing the Prophète or Africaine now. It's fascinating how this works sometimes. You know, in your career, Eric Jacobsen, it is fascinating to watch and to observe how you encounter different circumstances, and you step back, it's clear, and you think about, what can I do to bring a meaningful conversation into these relationships I'm going to have. I think it's clear too, don't you think, to finish our wonderful discussion today, that when you get in front of an orchestra, don't they mostly know that you're a virtuoso cellist as well? Do you think that makes any bit of difference among the string players? I'm not asking you about the trombone, the third trombone, but I'm just curious.
I think there's absolutely mutual respect when it comes to the recognition of what it does to become excellent at something. Right. And, sometimes now, talking to a very young, hopeful conductor, like a 15-year-old who says, I want to be a conductor, that seems odd to me, because, and everyone goes through their own process, but if I hadn't become a cellist, if I hadn't honed the skills to be good enough to be a musician on playing an instrument, that was as you started this conversation, coming up in the opera ranks. Like, I didn't come up in the opera ranks. I came up in the instrumental chamber / chamber orchestra, chamber quartet world.
Freelance New York musician.
Yeah. And there's no question that my respect on the podium for all the musicians who are there, who are playing, it's like, gosh, you have to hone that skill every day. You go home and you just go like this, and maybe it's not to get better. Maybe it's just to be able to do that as well as you could. And then maybe 2 days later, it is actually a step forward, and you always want to be better as a musician. How does one do that? And so if I hope that while I'm there on that podium, I exude that respect. And I hope that that's recognized, because we have to. This is such a hard thing. It's an Olympic athletic, sprint every time you actually are playing an instrument. And we don't think about that so much. I mean, how many great basketball players are there? How many great oboists are there? It's not that many. And you think about, well, clearly there could be more great basketball players. There could be more great oboists, but boy, does it take a lot to decide that that's the direction you're going to go in your life. So I hope that what you're saying does come across, which is a mutual respect of, whew, that's a lot. And, I'll say this, I hope that I translate that. I think a lot of it has to do with my father being a violinist in the Met Opera for so long, and telling me just a couple little things throughout the years that are just so bothersome. A conductor who corrects mistakes, like, that's unnecessary, because someone plays a B flat instead of a B natural. It's like, yeah, the next time they'll play it right. There's no, it's a waste of time to let people know that they made a mistake. It's just ridiculous. Because, I mean, if something happens 2 times, 3 times, okay, maybe it's a misprint. Maybe someone had some weird recording in their mind. It's just a mistake. That's fine. But, when we're there and doing something together, the idea that one makes a mistake and it's a big deal, it doesn't matter. You're spending time, you're rehearsing, you're getting to a shared mutual understanding of where you're going. It's so much more important than letting people know that you played a wrong note. So I hope that as a conductor, that is translated from having played an instrument.
No, it's fascinating. It's also very interesting about the role of the conductor. Because let's talk about that just for a few seconds, and then we have to go. You're up there trying to in a word, impose, in a way, your view of how a piece should go, how it should breathe, how it should, how the speed of it, the nature of it, the very essence of it. And there are 60, 70, 80, who knows how many in front of you, who you want to melt to your will, but at the same time, and this is the rub, this is the genius of it, you need their input back at you. Their input back at you is not only your input to them, that's that pressure in the baton that I was talking about, the Harry Potter Voldemort moment. So to end, talk about that mindset that you have to have when you start a new piece with a fresh orchestra, not people you know already. I assume with your three ensembles, that back and forth is very easy. But let's say it's the first time going before the X City Symphony, hard-nosed players. You're there, you put it down, it's a minute, you've got a minute and a half to show them you know what you're doing. Talk about that. What's in your head?
Well, I'll give the most obvious answer that I could think of is that you get right to work and do music, and you do the thing that you have to do because you just have to. And sometimes it's awkward at first, just like any other relationship. You be there, you do that thing, and I really think that that idea of surrounding yourself and embracing different ideas and really, really great musicians and great players and great minds. It's like Lincoln surrounding himself with a cabinet of people who disagreed because
cabinet of rivals. Yeah.
What's that?
Cabinet of rivals.
Exactly. Yeah. You end up having a group of people that will end up not compromising. You will end up with a group of people whose opinions are so strong that they have to actually really decide it's not, we're not good. I want it loud. I want it soft. Okay, let's play it in between. Well, that's not better. So how do you actually figure out what is better? And with an orchestra, I think it's so important to try to get that, right? It's not just, I mean, there's not enough time in the world to give everyone an exact idea of what you want as a conductor. Right. And it's ridiculous because generally speaking, in most pieces, you show up on the podium, if you haven't just centered in and only done that one piece of music your whole life, quite likely many people in the orchestra have played the piece as many times as you or have played it many more times than you. And there's such institutional memory as musicians that needs to be activated. And therefore, the chance of learning something and actually taking more away than you're able to give is, well, guilt-inducing and beautiful. The idea that like you can possibly participate in something that actually the oboes, they knew all along. And now so the next time you go and you're with a group that hasn't done it so much, you might be able to say, hey, there was this one time that, Jane was playing and I was so impressed with this and this is what they did. And that's actually the beauty of how communication is super slow and across generations. Yes, we have the internet. Yes, we can email. Yes, we can text and everything is instantaneous. But the oral tradition of music is one that's often about, words spoken and then sounds heard and going back and forth. So, it's why, we talk about, that version of that with the Vienna Philharmonic was 60 years away from when Brahms was alive. And therefore there's this, and those are such beautiful things and should be embraced. And wouldn't it be nice if the world was able to have that as a more formal way of communicating, not just the social media and the dangers of not actually looking at someone in the eye.
Well, I love your sincerity and the way you approach things. I think the answer is, frankly, when you get in front of that group for the first time or even the 100th time, there's a sincerity that you bring to it, which you've shown on our talk today. I can't thank you enough, Eric Jacobsen, for being on this broadcast with me.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's just such a total pleasure. Can't wait to see you again in a concert hall.
Would that be nice? Eric Jacobsen, musician extraordinaire, thank you so much for joining me on Interplay Conversations in Music.
Thank you so much for having me. Total pleasure.
I'm Michael Shapiro, your host. Looking forward to seeing you again on Interplay Conversations in Music. Thank you for joining us.